Okay, the hour of 8:30 has passed, so I'm calling this meeting to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Von Bergen. Here. Young.
Here.
Althoff.
Here.
Wegner. Here. Campbell.
Here.
Wilbeck.
Here.
Norwell.
Here.
Thorson.
Here.
Chairman Mueller.
Here. Everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes. Are there any questions or comments, or?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Bob makes a motion, Pam seconds. Any discussion? There being none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All righty. This is the time that we allot for public comment.
No public comment, sir.
No public comment. Members' comments? There being none, new business. I don't see anybody here representing the Lucky Sevens.
Not seeing that either.
Okay, so we'll skip that, we'll save that for later. Okay, first and foremost, a presentation by the Coroner and State's Attorney. Thank you for asking to join us here. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you for having us. I have been, there was a bill that was passed, I believe in June. It was House Bill 3447. And basically what this bill does is it decriminalizes a lot of drugs. And a lot of those drugs include cocaine, fentanyl, LSD, PCP, ecstasy, and that type of thing. What bothered me more is that not only was this being decriminalized, it also was the amount. And I don't think any amount of fentanyl should be legalized, but when you have 3 grams that are able to be decriminalized for somebody carrying that amount basically comes to about 1,500 people that can die of 3 grams. 1,500. It only takes about 2 milligrams for an average size adult to become lethal. And that's an average size adult. That's not including children that are in high school. It can be lower than that. And this passed the House. It has not gone in front of the Senate yet. And it's very concerning, not only to me, but other coroners that I've talked to in the state are very upset about this, even being thought of. Because I don't know how this actually makes our community better, safer, at all. I really don't. I have not seen anything, and it also expunges people's records on top. So I called the State's Attorney Patrick and talked with him a little bit about it and asked him to join us as far as the legal aspect of things, because I'm not a lawyer. But it is very concerning to me as the coroner is that I don't believe this is going to decrease overdose deaths at all. And also it's going to increase the amount of resources that my office is going to have to do. One other thing as far as I want to mention is suicides. Many suicide, people that die of suicide, have some type of drug in their system. Some of it's alcohol, but there are people that have these in their system before they die of suicide. So I think this is very concerning to not only McHenry County, but the state of Illinois. But as far as that goes, that's what I wanted to come and talk to you guys about, but,
Pam would like to,
Can I just ask, Michael, you said it's gonna impact your office. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, how it impacts your office and what potentially you see any additional cost? And then I would ask our state's attorney, Mr. Keneally, if you can elaborate, under what circumstances are they decriminalized? I noticed Michael indicated an amount, so what you're saying is that those substances up to a certain amount have been decriminalized under certain circumstances?
no, I think it's decriminalized, period. It's not, I don't think there's a circumstance behind it.
Can you give it the
That's what you're
definition of decriminalize?
Sure. So with respect to fentanyl, it used to be between 1 and 15 grams was a class 3 felony. Now they've turned that into a class 4 felony, and then anything, they've turned that into a class 4 felony, and then anything under 3 grams has been turned into a class 8 misdemeanor. And that's the same for fentanyl, it's the same for heroin, it's the same for cocaine, which are the 3 most concerning, I think, probably to both of us.
So between 1 and 15 is now a misdemeanor? Is that what you're saying?
No, less than 3 is a misdemeanor, less than.
And again,
Okay.
Michael, how does that impact your office
Well,
specifically?
any increased deaths, you know, you have to run toxicology, you're gonna have to do an examination. Anything that increases that amount, you're talking, probably up to $2,000 per examination, somewhere in that vicinity, depending upon. And I will say, with inflation, things are going up. So how that affects our office and the general budget overall, it will be affected, so.
That's what I'm asking.
If there's any other questions for me specifically, I'll turn it over to Mr. Keneally.
Just a couple points. I mean, how we determine whether or not somebody is a dealer or whether or not somebody is a user, there's really no fine distinction, especially in McHenry County. There's very few sort of dealer-only type of pushers in and around McHenry County, right? And most of the people that are dealing drugs also are suffering from a substance abuse problem themselves. And how police officers identify people who are dealers versus just somebody who may have a small amount for personal possession is really the amount of drugs that they have, because most of the time people aren't just going to tell on themselves and be like, oh, this, yes, I had 4 grams of heroin and I intended to give it to, Joe and some Todd. So that is concerning, and somebody who has 2 grams of fentanyl, again, that's enough to kill. What's the math here? If it's 2 grams, that's enough to kill
100,000.
Yeah, that's enough to kill about 1,000 people, because 2 milligrams of fentanyl is potentially a fatal dose. 15 milligrams of heroin on the low end is potentially a fatal dose. Usually it's around 50 milligrams. So even if you have 2 milligrams of heroin, which doesn't look like a lot in your hand, that's enough to not only make a considerable amount of money, but also enough to cause some significant harm and carnage in McHenry County. So I think that we both agree that by decriminalizing these substances, it has not only a legal effect in that it diminishes the penalties that people face for this incredibly destructive behavior that costs people their lives and causes an untold amount of misery in the lives of family members and friends. But it's also a cultural statement with regard to how we view the harm that these drugs are having on our society. And the more we decriminalize these types of things, the more people think that it's not as big of a deal as it really is. And I would recommend to you, there's been an ongoing discussion with regard to, hey, maybe we should decriminalize drugs. It's going to wipe out all the drug dealers, and there's not going to be this black market. I would recommend to you that you look at what's going on in Oregon right now. They took similar steps with regard to fentanyl as well as heroin to decriminalize these types of substances and sort of try to turn their drug response into simply a public health type of response. Overdoses are up 700%. ODs are up over 50% in terms of OD deaths are up over 50%. And very few people have actually been diverted into sort of the public health system in a way that is meaningful and helpful. So this seems to be in Illinois one of the first steps to go that route. And I know that alarm bells are going off not only in places like Coroner, as well as law enforcement, and all of these forums. There's a lot of people that are raising concerns, so we wanted to bring it to your attention. And if the county board had a statement, letter, things of that nature, I know that Will County and their county board regularly sends letters to the legislature with respect to some of the things that they see and some of the laws and their response to some of the laws that have been passed. And we wanted to recommend that.
Discussion, questions? I guess I'll ask the board, or the committee, how do you feel about potentially having a future resolution or doing a letter writing or what have you?
I would have to read more about the actual bill before I read a statement.
And what was that bill number again, Michael?
House
14?
Bill 3447.
When does that come up for a vote?
It has already passed the House. It has not been brought forward to the Senate. Obviously, they do have veto session, and they also have, I guess they call it like in January session and things of that nature. I do understand that if it is not brought forward, maybe Pam, you can help me with this. If it's not brought forward within that time, I guess it automatically dies, or there's something in that
Right.
nature.
And I would say that we have a little bit of time, because I doubt whether they'll try and deal with this during veto session. It's more likely that it would be lame duck, and the difference is lame duck only is a simple majority, where at veto you need the super majority vote. So again, something like this, I think they probably hold on and do between January 4th and January 11th.
So if part of this, and I don't know because you're just bringing it to my attention now. So if the question is, if part of this is designed to get at people who are addicts or who are at risk, how do we, and like you started to talk about how do you differentiate between users and pushers? And if users are experiencing a mental health issue, and maybe potentially what they're attempting to do here is decriminalize that to help get them into treatment, it is difficult. I don't want to see this happening either. So what would you propose? We're already trying to help people through the specialty court system, but are there other ways to help individuals for whom this is an addiction, truly an addiction, as opposed to criminal behavior? And you know what I'm saying?
Sure. So currently there's what's called 1410 probation. And 1410 probation is anybody that's charged with a probationary drug offense and it's their first offense can be put on what's 1410 probation. 1410 stands for the statutory section, and that allows them to go through a probationary period where sort of the rehabilitation response is ramped up with the probation officer, as well as recommendations to social service agencies and treatment providers, et cetera. And if that is successfully completed, then a conviction does not enter on that person's record, and after 18 months they can get it expunged. So you can reduce charges. The state's attorney's office, especially with first, second, third time offenses, very oftentimes these charges are being reduced to misdemeanors.
Even beyond the first time.
Even beyond the first time, and especially if there does appear to be a willingness and a will to try to seek treatment. So mitigating circumstances regularly include people doing inpatient substance abuse treatment, having gotten substance abuse evaluations and complied with the recommendations. Those types of things we view as a factor strongly towards not focusing strictly on punitive measures. Rather, we do begin to punitive measures in places like McHenry County and probably most counties, especially if you're just talking about people who are using drugs and where there's no indication or indicia of the fact that they're also dealing drugs. It is not until 4, 5, 6 times that were seeking felony convictions, and thereafter, and were almost never seeking a DOC sentence. And you also, and you add on top of that, and one of the programs that you mentioned was drug court. And so one of the hooks that gets people to comply with drug court is the fact that they're facing a DOC sentence. So it's a carrot and a stick type of approach. If somebody possesses 2 grams of fentanyl, and it's the 10th time that they've done it, and they've been through a rehabilitation process 3, 4, 5 times, and the only response that we feel would be appropriate in terms of ramping up accountability would be a DOC sentence. If you're just going to say, oh, they're only charged with a misdemeanor, then they can't go to drug court because they're not high risk, and there's no stick at the end of it if they don't comply with the services that are provided in drug court. So that's another issue.
Gentlemen, could you maybe provide this committee with some information detail with regard to everything that we're expressing, or that you're expressing today?
Sure.
Happy to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Has the Coroners Association taken position, Michael?
No, I actually just contacted them yesterday, and from my understanding, they really didn't know about it. So,
Will you keep us in the loop, though, if that
Yeah.
goes forward as well, too, please? Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now, at this point, I see that our liquor license applicant has come in. Bob, I'm gonna hand the meeting over to you. I'm gonna ask you to bring them up to the table and let's have the chat.
Okay, sounds good. So, Mr. Athans? Yeah, take the hot seat.
It's good to see you, Ike.
Can't either.
Hi, Jeff.
I know, she's not looking at me.
Mr. Athans.
This is my attorney, Bob.
Rubber room. Oh, it is. So first off, you, welcome to the committee. And you're here for a Class A license to open, I guess you call it 777.
Correct.
Gaming and gambling.
Correct.
And do you want to get a motion first? or-
Yeah, could we have a motion? We have a motion and a second, all in favor, or opening up up for discussion,
Yeah,
sorry
for
about that.
discussion. So first off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself so we can get a little understanding of what you're planning on doing and
Okay,
what
well,
you do
I can
yourself?
start, my family's parents settled in Crystal Lake back in the 40s, so I've been here most of my whole life, other than a short stint in the military. I've been in business in McHenry County for over 50 years, different businesses. And my present one is a manufacturing company that I own. We employ 14 people. We're currently located in Crystal Lake. We're going to be relocating the lake and the hills here probably by the first of the year into a larger building. Because we outgrew the one we have. And 10 years ago, we were one of the first applicants with the Illinois Gaming Board for licensed terminal operator. So we pursued that, and then we sold that company about 5, 6 years ago. So this parlor is something I just wanted to do on the side.
And this place is, this new place is on 31.
About 31.
Yeah, Route 31 up in Crystal Lake.
Correct.
Yeah. So this store, just so I understand a little bit, you have a manager, this Michelle Lenkowski?
Yes,
something like that,
yes.
yeah. She's going to be operating it for you?
Yes.
So, because you're obviously busy with other
Correct.
things, so this is
Correct.
kind of an investment for you. Okay, that sounds good. It's a good intro. I know, going through the packet, I'm sure everybody has here, but you have the approval from the health department
Correct.
and from the planning and development. You have your insurance in place.
Yes, sir.
Michelle has her basic training, and a renter's agreement was also included in the packet. So everything seems to be in order. I don't know if anybody has any questions for the applicant.
All looks good to me.
So, no questions, and you want to do a roll call? Or?
Yeah, could we go to roll call, please?
Noack,
Yes.
Wilcox,
Yes.
Von Bergen,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Altoff,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Thorson.
Yes.
So the committee has approved it,
All right,
and we
great, thank
actually have the liquor commissioner here today at the meeting. So you're very fortunate. We want to tell you though, the license is a privilege in McHenry County, so please follow the laws and make sure that your manager, I guess Michelle, follows the training. I know that passive training is really in-depth and it's good. I've taken it myself, I enjoyed it.
All right, great, thank you.
We thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Good luck.
All right,
Thank you.
good luck.
Thanks, Jeff.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Here's your license.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right. Now, let's move back to the regular agenda and ask that Senator Craig Wilcox come and just give us a little spiel about what's going on in Springfield.
How's everyone doing today?
Morning.
Very well. So I guess we can start with House Bill 3447. I'll be anxious to hear how the different state reps voted on that and what their views were. As Pam mentioned, the likelihood of it coming forward in veto session is less given the voting requirement. So we've been told that lame duck session will likely be 12 days long, potentially. Could be one of the longest ones we've had. But what happens in lame duck? You may have a number of people that have chosen in their own mind that sometime post-election they're going to resign, so they know that their votes will no longer be held against them. We saw that in 2019 in the 2020 election. Some resigned prior to the election, but their name was still on the ballot. Some resigned early enough to allow for a name to be placed on the ballot, and some resigned after they'd won, which meant, then they would control their replacement. The challenge becomes in lame duck, if you can claim that the vote is no longer going to be held against them, it allows the parties to kind of influence their members a little bit closer. And so let's talk about the Safety Act, because the Safety Act is a very critical bill that passed in lame duck at 4 in the morning, that never went through legislative committees, and in both the House and in the Senate, 4 members who were basically considered lame ducks voted yes. And the bill passed with 60 votes in the House, so they needed every one of those lame duck votes. And in the Senate, it had 32, so they needed at least 2 of those lame duck. That's the importance of what happens when you start passing bills in lame duck session, especially if you get outside of the rules and don't have legislative hearings. So the Safety Act passed on, I believe it was January 13th at 4 in the morning after being dropped an hour before, 729 pages. The proponents claim that they've been talking about it for months, so it wasn't a worry that it didn't go through the legislative committee. Well, the problem is when you are proposing a bill, likely you are talking with your opponents very little and your proponents very much. So you get into an echo chamber and you believe that you've already done everything necessary within the bill. The problem is when they said that they had talked with law enforcement, it meant they had one person in law enforcement from the sheriffs or from whatever. They were not talking to the association as a whole. They certainly weren't, and actually I think it was Jim Nolan, former legislator, journalist now, wrote a nice article about why bastardizing the legislative process misses critical things. And his point being that when you go through legislative committees and you go through the hearings and opponents are forced to have that reckoning and bring up their points, sponsors are forced to kind of address why they have something in there that the opposition is opposed to. And sometimes it can just be ideological. Sometimes you can pick up something that is very critical in the way something is worded, so where the legislative intent and the letter of the law are not matched up. And we believe a lot of that that you're hearing now, which has 4 state's attorneys and I believe 100 state's attorneys against the Safety Act. There are only 2 state's attorneys that have openly supported the Safety Act, and that is Cook County and Lake County. So some of the arguments against it, it creates a whole list of non-detainable offenses to include second-degree homicide, arson, kidnapping. I'm sure one of the state's attorneys who's filed suit can give you the full list. And the reality is, some in the majority maybe don't believe that that's what they've created. They call this misinformation for stating it, but it's going to be in the lawsuits. The other part, when you detain someone or look to detain someone at the very first hearing, you have the option of saying that they are a danger to a specific individual or a danger to the community as a whole. And that's a little easier in that first hearing. But then there's hearings every 90 days after, and in those additional hearings, that threat to the community disappears. So they can only be a threat to a specific individual. So a carjacker carjacks a certain vehicle and is very aggressive and violent with that driver, maybe it's very difficult with the preponderance of evidence to show they're a danger to anyone else. That may have been the only car they really wanted. My favorite statement, and it may not be the best legal strategy, but when you tell the judge that you only intended to kill your wife, you're not a danger to anyone else, well, they're dead, so you're not a threat to any specific person. The burden in those timelines for holding bail becomes very difficult. Maybe the state's attorney can come up and talk about the constitutional aspect of this law versus some other parts. But it's going to be a challenge. We're starting to hear out of the Attorney General that maybe he is accepting that there need to be changes. Some of the sponsors have talked about the potential for trailer language. The challenge is whether that'll come forward in veto or lame duck, and there's no guarantee. And obviously lame duck is post-January 1st, so a lot of this can go into play before we do anything. What will it really mean out here? There are many people that are claiming that without a doubt you are going to see an increase in resource requirements required, whether it's in the state's attorney's office, in the public defender's office, whether it's going to be in supporting victims, because a lot of what this bill appears to have done, and they're going to argue that it only takes effect in 2023. The reality, if you look at Cook County, you can see a lot of these have been in play for 18 to 24 months. As of last February, and I forgot to go check heyjackass.com, but in February, 111 violent felons who were out on cashless bail with electronic monitoring had been rearrested for additional violent felony attempts. So what this law likely will do is, in my view, it is placing criminals' rights well ahead of victims' rights, and will actually increase the number of victims due to people reoffending when maybe they should not have been out on the street as a threat to the community. If that's what we're accepting out here, then we'll be all fine and dandy. If you don't think that Cook County crime is starting to come this way, just take a look at the gun exchange on Bull Valley and 31. Look at the smash and grabs going on at the car dealerships. The reality is, as criminals either get incentivized to carry around more drugs because it's been decriminalized, or there's less of an incentive or less of a worry when you actually get caught, that all you're going to be doing is getting a slap on the wrist, and maybe even what we're hearing, released before the police paperwork is even truly completed. You are disincentivizing any concern about what you're doing to others. You look at the internet provides access to all kinds of things. The number of videos that you can find on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram, where the common response now when you see a violent attack going on is to record it, because maybe I'll get some TikTok money or some advertising on the internet because I'll be the first to post it. No one else is intervening anymore on behalf of individuals, on behalf of victims. You know, I don't know whether we even need the Good Samaritan law anymore because there are no Good Samaritans responding. The number of sucker punches, the number of 5-on-1s, it is just getting a little bit ridiculous. And so the question for you, and obviously your state's attorney has already filed suit, is will you adopt a resolution demanding change or repeal of the Safety Act to inform your legislators? And that's really what we're here to ask you to do, is to inform us of your concerns. So that's a lot of me talking. What have you guys heard on the Safety Act? Whether you think that people are just scaring up people because it's election season, or whether things are actually true about what's in the legislation.
You always look at me first.
Kelly?
Respectfully, I have to disagree with some of the things you were saying. First of all, when you talked about the 111 convicted felons that are out on the streets, basically if they made bail, they would be out on the streets anyway, correct?
If they made bail, yes.
Okay, so what we're thinking here, I mean, and I don't agree with every single thing in the Safety Act. I know there needs to be changes, but just because somebody has the ability to make bail doesn't mean that they should be out on the street, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The argument for the support is that same crime, two individuals, one wealthy, one not, and they like to use the example of the wealthy drug dealer as opposed to the non-dealer, that why should one be able to make bail and the other not?
Right.
And there are parts that we absolutely agree with. And a lot of the reason this bill came into place is in Cook County, the sheriff was seeing a number of people remaining in their prison for failure to make bail, whether it's a $200 bail or $500 bail, and that upsets life. Loses a job, creates hardship.
Correct.
So there are two parts. One, there are places where we agree that there should probably be no bail required, but it certainly isn't second-degree homicide or kidnapping. And then on the other side, we absolutely agree that there should be parity between who can bail out and who cannot. But the problem is when they listed their non-detainable offenses, there's no balance of whether you can or can't. It's just, if this is your offense, it is non-detainable and out you're gonna go. So that's the challenge.
Okay, I understand that. The other part, last year I had asked the sheriff in this meeting if safety wasn't a concern here in the county, and he said no. He said that safety has safety has remained the same or even gotten safer because of the percentage of violent crimes and home crimes. So I want to make sure that we don't go on record saying that McHenry County is unsafe or going to become unsafe just because people are scared of what is in this bill. Yeah, we've had the 31 Bull Valley, and those are significant, but they're not everyday occurrences. So we just need to make sure that we're not putting out the narrative, be scared of where we live.
So you don't believe that a law potentially can change character? That's
No,
great.
that's not what I
So
said.
because it's safe back then, it's gonna be safe now.
That's not what I said.
Sheriff's Office, have property crimes gone up in McHenry County? Maybe we ought to ask some different questions. Have ODs gone up? Have drug possessions gone up? Have the amount of drug possessions gone up? And if you start decriminalizing them under 3447, or you start making things non-detainable at significant levels, there is no doubt there is a less concern about being arrested on those. So yeah, I will go on record saying if this bill passes and becomes law on January 1st, that yes, we will see an increase in crime in McHenry County and elsewhere in the state, and victims will start feeling the ramifications of law enforcement's failure to be able to hold people who will then be out to reoffend.
I understand.
So, now,
I-
valid question on House Bill 3447, ask your sheriff,
Yes.
how many members are currently in the McHenry County Jail in a less than 365-day sentence for up to 3 grams of any of these drugs? That's a valid question to ask, because then you can say exactly House Bill 3447 is going to either release these individuals or have very little impact. So those are good questions to ask.
Right, and I will ask questions, just one more thing.
Okay.
I just want to make sure, you said there aren't any good Samaritans out there anymore. There are. And we need to be careful about saying that. And that's my point about fear. I know plenty of people who've jumped in to help. So I just want to make sure that the message out of McHenry County isn't fear. That we are doing everything possible to keep people safe, and we will continue to do everything possible to keep people safe. Whether it's changing the Safety Act, whether it's looking at the HB 3447, I think that's very important to keep people safe. It's just the narrative that we want to make sure it's coming out of the county.
And that's a great promise, so I guess my question to you would, what uptick in crime would it take for you to see in 6 months, a year, or 2 years to acknowledge that maybe we should have had a different narrative today?
Well, I'd have to study the bills a little bit more to see what the possibilities could be and hear more about 3447.
I'd
So
like
if
to
we have an
hand the floor
uptick
over
in
to
crime,
Pam.
we'll probably attribute it to the economy and the recession and the pandemic and mental health issues
Yeah.
as opposed to this bill.
No, that's not true.
Pam?
So, Senator, this committee has kind of made a commitment and a promise to get more engaged, obviously, with our state legislators moving forward. You can tell already that this is an issue that there's a little bit of a difference of opinion, or not maybe opinion, but approach. Help us out, and if we're going to discuss this, and McHenry County wants to take a position and send you a message, can you also provide us at a later date specifics on what we really should be looking at? For example, some revisions I'm hearing already, yes, guide us a little bit and help us, not today, obviously, but let us know specifically where you think that legislation. So if we do consider and we do want to pass a resolution or send a letter, we're very specific so that we feel that we're not, that we're working as a whole and our voice is unified in giving you some kind of a direction or support or whatever it is that you're also seeking to.
Sure, that's
Okay.
Relatively easy to do. The challenge, as you know, we could offer you all kinds of thoughts, but without knowing what the legislative agenda will be at different times. We may end up giving you much more, and then I don't want you to get frustrated that you've offered positions on 7 things and only one of them ever comes up. Because if we wait to know what that agenda is, then it will be well behind the power curve.
But there might be things, and then I'll show up. But there might be things like you just said here, where again, depending upon what the situation is, bail versus no bail, rich guy versus not so well funded guy, guide us into that and say these are the areas that we really think you need to look at, and we'd be willing to assist you in finding a solution or whatever it is. But that's what I'm kind of saying, where you think that we really need to hone in and say specifically here are the areas that we think you need to take a double look at.
I mean, it could be as simple as putting into your legislative plan that, McHenry County opposes any bill that never has legislative committees and doesn't follow, the democratic process of actually allowing the public to be involved in opposition to have its day. And, the first thing that I learned when we got a chance to meet with the Supreme Court justices after being sworn in is that they always want to see debate on a controversial bill, because if not, all they can do is go by the letter of the law. And I'll tell you, we really in Springfield don't know how to write our laws really well. Whether the lobbyists have done it for years and are skilled at it, the challenge is still the letter of the law becomes what the Supreme Court needs to assess. And if there's debate, they can garner a little bit more of the legislative intent. So when legislative intent is on the record, but the wording maybe didn't quite get it, that provides the court, that extra balance. So,
And my understanding is that there is a quite of diverse opinion on how to interpret the Safety Act right now. And between individual counties, regardless of politics, regardless of what division of law enforcement is looking, there's a wide disparity on how to interpret the way it's written. Precisely because of what you're saying.
The Supreme Court-focused task force is even having difficulty making
Yes, sir.
recommendations on how you implement certain sections, yes.
So that information would be helpful. Thank you.
What, as a state senator, what's the most impactful form of a statement to be made to you to try to sway you one way or the other? I mean, obviously we can always file witness slips if there's enough notice and we're able to do so, or you had mentioned possibly a resolution to effective either repeal or change. I mean, what's most impactful for our legislators?
Witness slips, we have without a doubt seen the ability for them to affect how both the majority and minority party respond. We've seen the positive side where it's forced change. We've seen the negative side where it just means the bill's going to get killed and the same language is going to show up in another bill, which in essence wipes out the witness slips. So, you know, it can have that potential one way or the other. I think the fact that a resolution which goes through and gets a vote by the board, which are the elected representatives of the majority of the county, and then you send that down, that certainly is a bit stronger than just the county board asking residents to sign witness slips, I think. But I think collectively the two together would be probably more impactful.
Senator, you just identified a scenario with regard to witness slips, and I wanted to ask you, is that a situation that occurred in this instance?
On the Safety Act, I don't think the language was ever out there for witness slips, so I
There
don't
wasn't
think
similar
didn't go
legislation
through.
that was pending?
Some of, there are legislation aspects, hot topics, Second Amendment, abortion, a few others that tend to exhibit a significant increase in the number of witness slips. I mean, previously, the number of witness slips usually is in the hundreds or maybe low thousands. There were ones that were in the multi-tens of thousands, and that bill then got stripped and replaced, so it wiped the slate clean. You'll hear that come up in floor debate if the bill gets to that level, where others will go back and highlight what the same language had for witness slips on a different bill, but the proponent never will.
Yeah.
So there's those challenges with the system, and then the whole timeline, right? If we give 48-hour notice, then it's a little easier for the public to know that it's out there. If we change and accept the rules into 1 hour notice or 1 hour posting, then the number of witness slips is significantly more difficult to, you know, make an impact.
Any further questions? Okay.
Just, do you have any specific legislation that you're introducing that you want to garner support, or at least let us know about, that might make an impact or might affect McHenry County?
From a
that we
law and
should-
government, and since you had a liquor aspect here, I probably won't file this year, depending on how it comes out. But understanding where the limitations are on liquor commissioners and what businesses they or their family can own, not apply necessarily at the county level, but certainly at the municipal level, I'm starting to have significant concerns. So I want to address that a little bit. Law and government, probably nothing else that would fit necessarily.
It doesn't have to be law and government.
Well, actually, there would be one more. We may do a town hall with a probate bill. Right now in Illinois, and we haven't chatted yet, but probate, sometimes 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. In Illinois, you can also be a disinterested party and have standing to intervene, which has caused some issues on some wealthy estates where even someone not in the will has decided they want to muck things up. So, you know, the one that we'll be talking about has been ongoing for 10 years in probate. And there's some, we believe, some relatively simple changes that could be made. And so that may or may not be in the form to file early in session. So, but won't be anything filed before Vigo or lame duck.
And the only other thing, Mr. Chair, is are we providing our legislative agenda to all of our elected officials ultimately? And then I would just ask that if you have any questions about anything that you see that we're dealing with, I would assume we'll have that conversation, but.
I'm guessing you'd want to dig into LGDF and find out why did it appear up until the last 6 or 7 days that LGDF was going to go to 8% with a promise to maybe go back to full 10% last year's budget, and then all of a sudden have that ripped out from underneath every municipality. You might want to ask some questions there and figure out what's really going on. So especially since there were billions extra and at least $3 billion in unappropriated funds in 2023 right now, so guess you just don't matter.
Well, thank you, Senator, very much for
Absolutely.
joining us. I really
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
very much.
And I would ask Representative Reick to join us at the table.
Senior statesman.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Craig did a pretty good job on the Safety Act, and frankly, it's not been something that I've focused on in great depth. But I think that his statements regarding cashless bail and what we're hearing on both sides of the debate pretty much are doing a good job of clouding what probably are the ultimate issues in it. I'm waiting to see what happens when it comes out of it. My focus is going to be on HB 3447 because I don't think you can open a daily or a Northwest Herald any day these days without somebody being either accused, convicted, or the victim of drug-induced homicide. And this bill that passed in the House and admittedly did not get through the Senate does nothing but make it more likely that we're going to see more and more of those stories. That bill passed in the House with a vote of 61 yes, 49 no. So it can be said, I think, that anybody who voted yes on 3447 was one of two votes that expanded the possibility of increased drug homicides in McHenry County. I don't think there's any way around that. The issues of 3447 were pretty plainly stated by our coroner and our state's attorney. I want to point out another issue that will probably see as I'm sure an unintended consequence. Analogize this to the straw purchaser issues with firearms. Most straw purchasers of firearms are people that have never had a conviction, have a valid FOID card, go into a gun shop or a store, purchase a firearm because they don't have a record, they have a FOID card. They're able to legally buy the gun, and then the gun goes out on the street. And that person never buys another firearm because if the firearm is ever traced back to that person, you can say, hey, I lost it, it was stolen, it was in my car and somebody took it. When in fact the issue was one at the very outset of somebody whose intent was to purchase that firearm for somebody else to use. I think we're going to see the same issue with regard to possession of opioids, specifically fentanyl, which is the hot topic now. Here in McHenry County and throughout the state, somebody who hasn't had a conviction or someone who has had an expunged misdemeanor is now going to be able to go out and transport, be a mule for larger amounts of these opioids and bring them into our community so that they can be used to doctor up and extend the effectiveness or availability of other drugs. So what we're doing is we're not only making it less likely that somebody is going to pay the price for killing somebody with an opioid or a deadly substance, we're going to make it much more likely that we're going to see more and more of that because it's going to be easier for people to bring these types of things into this county and into the state without paying a full price. Now there's another part of 3447 that didn't get spoken about either. It's the fact that if you're sitting in jail now, having been convicted of an offense of possession of fewer than, let's use fentanyl again, 3 grams, which at the time, which now is a felony. Once 3447 goes into effect and that person is released, they can go back into court and ask that their sentence be readjusted down to a misdemeanor, whereupon it can be expunged after 5 years, which means that they're back out on the street doing what they were doing before. So this bill, I believe, is the one bill by which we, as legislators, whose job is to ensure public safety above everything else. That is the first and foremost job of any state legislator, is to make sure that our people are safe. That anyone who voted for that bill failed in their job, and I certainly couldn't support that. The ramifications of that bill of 3447 have yet to hit us. If it gets through the Senate and the governor signs it, which I have no doubt that he will, then we're going to start seeing the impact of that, and I think that's inexcusable. So that's pretty much, that's pretty much my presentation on those things. Questions?
Committee?
Just again, the same question I'll always do. Thank you very much for the presentation. Anything that you specifically are working on legislatively that you're going to file, or do you have any questions for us about any of the issues that we've identified as being important?
No, I appreciate the fact that, you're taking and elevating these questions to the role of, to public awareness. This is very important. Assuming I return to the General Assembly next year, my focus, it's funny, when I started in the General Assembly, my background was tax. I wanted to revamp the tax system. I'd love to still do that, but in this day and age, that's going to be almost impossible. Bring to light our pension programs, but the thing that has been motivating me for the past several years is our failures at the Department of Children and Family Services. And we all know how that affects the people in this county, how the DCFS office in McHenry County has been the place where the department places problem children investigators, and we end up with a lower quality and standard of investigations, not because of the efforts of the people who are here, but for the fact that they walk around with a banana peel under their foot half the time. The procedures that are involved in investigating and bringing cases to proper conclusion in terms of placement of children are so misguided and so bad that several years ago I introduced a bill to create a pilot program here in McHenry County, because we do have the luxury of having a judicial circuit here that is coterminous with the county lines. So what I wanted to do was to create local child welfare agencies within the bounds of county of circuit courts, because obviously you go downstate and circuit courts are much bigger than one county, and use the state agency as merely a case management system and record keeping and maybe training and things like that, but leave the investigative function and the actual responsibility for what happens to our children. And that is the first and foremost function of the Department of Children and Family Services, is to protect children. It's not to rehabilitate families. If I would recommend one book, it's called No Way to Treat a Child by Naomi Schaefer Riley, who's a researcher at the American Enterprise Institute, wrote this great book showing the fact that departments like DCFS nationwide, it's not just Illinois, which focus more on trying to rehabilitate families when such is not capable of being done. Kids have got a shelf life. They don't, when you're 26 years old, it's too late. When you're 3, it's not. But by the time that kid gets to 8, 9 years old and has been bounced around in 5, 6, 10 homes, by the time that kid has been beaten from pillar to post by 5 different sets of foster parents or by their own parents, or have slept in an office because there was no place else for them to go, or they've been kept in psychiatric homes and hospitals because there's no place for them to be placed, and to stifle any chance of permanency for these kids. We're losing a generation. They're going to end up back in the system, and they're going to be back in the cycle, and we're going to be dealing with for the next 50 years. So my point was that I wanted to see an agency that was committed to answering to people like you, the board, the county board, the bringing the state's attorney into the situation, not as a prosecutor or anything like that, but as somebody who can provide guidance to the agency to see what can be done for these kids before they end up becoming a statistic. And that is my major goal. I know I sit in the super minority in the House, but I get a lot of comments and I get a lot of support from people on the other side of the aisle when I bring this argument to them. And my major, frankly, my only legislative priority in the next General Assembly is going to be moving the ball forward on reforming an agency that I think is utterly irredeemable. So, yes, ma'am.
I would just suggest, have you talked to our mental health board about
Yes,
this? Yeah, I would definitely.
I have talked to the mental health board, I've talked to Patrick's office, I've talked to the judges. They all know what's going on. They see it. We see it. I mean, we see dead kids. We see kids going to the hospital with, drug overdoses and all sorts of things that just turn your stomach. And if one thing could be done here, and I don't know that this is the committee to do it, but if we could have a committee formed here in the county board to examine specifically the shortcomings of this agency in this county and makes concrete recommendations as to how a county or base it on judicial circuit, not on county, because I want to see this thing go statewide. Figure out where the intersection points. What's the Venn diagram of county or judicial circuit involvement with child welfare? And give me recommendations. I can't do this by myself. I've got a lot of people of good intention and good heart who are willing to help me with this. But the more I get, the better off we're going to be. The sooner we can get this done. That's going to be my priority. Any other questions? Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Reick. I hope I don't butcher your last name, Jeff. Keicher?
Thanks.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure. Sorry, Jeff. Thank you for joining us very
You
much.
bet. Thanks for the ginger approach to pronouncing the last name. I certainly appreciate it. So I'm State Representative Jeff Keicher of the 70th District. Just for some clarification, I am currently not representing any portion of McHenry County, but will do so under the next map. I do not have an opponent, so I will represent the far southern and eastern portion of the county, Grafton Township, a few of those areas over there in those precincts. So appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. I understand this meeting might go a little long, so I will try to hit the highlights of the notes that I've taken along the way listening to the discussion so far. House Bill 3447, I want to share with you that it was 61 votes for, 49 votes against, and 1 vote present. It was bipartisanly voted against, but was only supported by Democrats in our chamber. Now that's a reflection of the situation that we have, and I don't mean to sound partisan in any way, thank you so much.
But right now in this state, we have a supermajority led by the Democrats in both chambers of our General Assembly. What that means is that the Democrats can pass any legislation that they want, including a constitutional amendment, without a single Republican in the room, okay? Democratic Party also controls every executive office in the state of Illinois, which also means that there's no check at the executive level. Now, when that becomes important is when we see bills like 3447 and also the Safety Act, where that type of jamming through bills that haven't been contemplated, where the legislative process has been corrupted, and where we don't have hearings, where we can have folks give and take on some of those issues, becomes very problematic when we try to implement. So we have a situation now where we have a Safety Act that's being put into place, where arguably the biggest complaint is no one knows what it's actually supposed to do. So we had the opportunity about 3 weeks ago to have a first responders forum, and we had the opportunity to hear from Judge Hull in Kane County. Kane County has been chosen as one of the pilot states for implementation of the Safety Act and how that works within their structure. We understand from that discussion that the state's attorney's office, I believe the number is 62 additional hires for the state's attorney's office. Now, a good part of that doesn't come from the bail or no bail, cashless bail. That's almost a red herring on some of the fundamental issues of implementation that are going on with the Safety Act. The requirement upon detention of an immediate hearing to be able to have the judicial representative available 7 days a week so that there's convenience also means that those charges and the police report and narrative needs to be produced in a quick fashion. So imagine having a responding situation where you have 5 officers, it's a 45-minute scenario, and you need to prove up before a judge at a hearing whether this is a person who could be detained or not. You need somebody at both the state's attorney's office and the prosecutor's office, or the defender's office, to be able to review from those 5 body cameras all of the evidence to determine what needs to go in that narrative. That narrative needs to be prepared, reviewed, and presented to the judge. By that time, we will have many folks that should be behind bars, regardless of the bail scenario, out on the streets because we weren't able to supply the evidence necessary prior to their hearing upon detention to be able to make that judgment.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What do they mean by immediate, and is there any kind of, in your head, a time frame within 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever, but that immediate, what are they interpreting that to mean?
I would defer to the state's attorney on what specifically their parameters are, but I've been informed that that means the next practicable time. And that means within the next day, because
Okay.
I've been told
Okay.
that we need to have judges available 7
Saturday and
days a
Sunday.
week in order to hear these detention hearing cases.
Thank you.
And that 62 bodies at the state's attorney's office doesn't take into account the defender's office as well. So from a county governance standpoint, please be prepared under the Safety Act, not just for patrol officers to be able to handle this, but also to be able to have your state's attorneys and public defender's offices fully staffed and hiring expansive in order to deal with that. You're also going to run into a situation where you need to have someone in the field, a responding officer, be able to contact somebody back at the department, whether that's a sergeant, a captain, somebody at the judiciary, somebody at the prosecutor's office, to be able to advise them on the case matter in front of them, whether it's detainable or non-detainable offense. You run into uncertainty from frontline police officers on what they're able to do, and I don't think that leads to a situation where we will feel, regardless of the practical numbers that are in, that we're doing our job effectively, because there is that uncertainty into the process. And right now, officers act with certainty, and we expect them to act with certainty. We expect them to respond right away, given the danger that's out there. So, when we look at 3447, legalizing fentanyl, I want to share with you that I lost a cousin in 2016 from an overdose of heroin laced with fentanyl. She had a whole series of life challenges that led her to being found in a Big Lots parking lot. Officers responding tested positive for fentanyl in the vehicle. We weren't able to take her vehicle back into possession. Where we are now going to be shielding the folks that supplied her with those drugs that ended her life. We have taken too strong of an approach on where we are not holding those responsible for their actions responsible, where we are letting decisions be made, where we can have someone walk away from a very serious impact to someone else's life. And I think nothing embodies that better than 3447. Now, arguably, the motivation behind this was, for far too long, we've criminalized to far too far of a degree drugs that aren't as harmful, marijuana being one of them, right? It's not the same level. But to include fentanyl and some of the other hard drugs into those levels of decriminalization is beyond the pale. I had a discussion last night with one of my peers, and going back to the implementation of some of these bills, we have a significant lurch to the right and to the left within our legislature. If you look at who's coming out of the primary campaigns that were conducted in June, we have a divergent General Assembly. We have very strong ideological bent that's going in either opposite direction. There is very little middle ground that's being brought. So what that means is, more than likely, a continued dissension within the General Assembly of resolving these issues. So the question came up earlier, what can we do to best express our concerns with bills, whether it's a Safety Act or 3447? I would tell you, don't rest. Don't rest on 3447 being in the Senate in assignments. What we saw during the last lame duck session is we saw the Safety Act come out and pass by the bare minimums that it needed to pass. And the reason for that is we didn't have enough people across the spectrum talking to their legislators about the concerns that they have on those bills. So don't assume that everything will act in a process. Speak soon, speak loudly, speak clearly upon what your concerns are, and share them across the political spectrum, share them across your constituency. And just because we will or won't be representing part of McHenry County, I would encourage you to make that voice heard across the state. So don't keep it to yourself. To answer your earlier question on bills that I might be working on, an issue that we've been fighting for the past 4 years, and I'm not sure the extent to which you see it in McHenry County. We have a significant issue along some of our state routes, 72, 30, 34, 23, 38, 64, where waste haulers going from a transfer station to the dump are causing significant commercial plastic to be spread into our farm fields, creating a significant issue for a lot of our farmers as they go to put their crops in and turn over their soil. So I have introduced a bill that is non-implementable, so we are holding on that, but we're coming back with some solutions on that. One of the lessons from that to be aware of and share with your sheriff's office is there is a perception among rank and file police officers that a truck violation can only be stopped if you're certified at that level, that corresponding level, to impact that size of a truck. A littering violation is something that any officer can pull over. You do not need to be certified to handle big trucks as a police officer in order to cite for littering. Additionally, I have a bill that we'll be working on that will deal with DUI convictions. And if during a DUI you kill a parent of a child, that outside the bounds of insurance, you are able to claim child support from that at-fault driver. So we run into a situation where somebody having a DUI either has no insurance or not enough insurance, $25,000 limit, and that won't go near enough to pay restitution towards what that child's loss will be through their life. So we're looking at making that child support available to the at-fault DUI scenario. So tried to fill in the gaps there, tried to talk quick because you got a lot of people behind me, but any questions?
I'm sorry. The comment you made about littering, is that common knowledge? Is there a way that has gotten out? I mean, we in McHenry County have dealt with a noise ordinance interpretation for a long time as well. So my ask would be is, how's that information getting disseminated?
If you look at my bill in the House, I think it was 162, it was kind of the first bill that people tried to put into place to change this. it's been just like this, ma'am. It's been
Just
voice-to-voice
voice.
discussion about where we need to go and what we need to do about it. Our law enforcement partners at the Illinois State Police have informed us, listen, any officer can pull somebody over for littering. That's what the violation is. And if I'm not mistaken, a portion of that littering fine comes back to the county. So it's also, you know, it's a win-win.
I like that.
Right? Yeah.
That's good.
Any other questions? Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thank you
Really
all. Appreciate it.
Very informative, thank you. All right. Next up is Representative Tom Weber. Tom? Thank you for joining us.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Tom.
How are you? I'm State Representative Tom Weber. I live in Lake Villa in Lake County. My district goes over into McHenry, into Johnsburg, Spring Grove, McHenry, Bull Valley, down into Crystal Lake, kind of one of those districts that zigzags throughout Lake and McHenry County. So appreciate you inviting me here. Sorry I missed a little bit of the beginning, so I'm trying to catch up on stuff. So I know a lot of discussion on the Safety Act so far. I don't want to beat on that one, but I will say I was on a conference call that had a state's attorney. And you know, when we look at this, I think we have seen some of what it's going to look like coming out of Cook County, California, some of these other places where, you know, they are letting some of these criminals out already. But in this instance, the state's attorney that I spoke with had a reference that they had a carjackings, and they were looking for him. They finally found the person. The person was wearing an ankle bracelet, was released from, I believe it was Cook, and had already stolen 2 other vehicles. So, you know, 2 bites at the apple for some of these things where they should be kept longer, especially when it comes to trafficking drugs, where there used to be maybe a $500,000 bond, where now they will be released. And to think that these people will stay in the state and return to court is a big concern for most people. All right, so that's my little comment on HB 3447. Most of us have known somebody or somebody in our family who either have addiction or have died of addiction. You know, heroin killed my nephew, 38 years old. He became addicted when he was in high school. He fought it for years, and you know, we believe he just couldn't do it anymore. He has a 4-year-old younger brother that started at the same time. I believe right now he's 34 years old. And my sister and her husband are still dealing with it, and again, it started in high school. You know, when we talk about securing our southern border, it's offensive to me in Springfield when we get called, you know, you're racist because you want to secure the southern border. Poison is crossing our southern border, and if we don't do something about it, we are going to continue to see this. I saw, I believe it was Antioch, 3 high school students overdosed 2-3 weeks ago. And that is becoming more and more in your face on social media and in papers. I think it's something we have to do something about. I hope that the Senate will not see this bill and it will not pass. Does anyone have any questions on that? Let me just say, so my nephew has used my brother and sister tried to move, and they moved to another state. Because of issues with my nephew, they were actually removed from their apartment they were staying in while they were looking for a place to live. It's horrible what's going on, you know, what happens to these families that are dealing with addiction.
Thank you.
And I apologize, I missed the state's attorney's comments on this, but I assume I probably can hear them.
Any questions from the committee? Yes, we do.
Just want to know what your legislative priorities will be for this coming year.
Oh, okay, we're getting there.
Oh, okay, sorry, but we're done.
I'm just going one step at a time here, so I just want to say. So as we heard from Representative Reick, for anyone that follows Springfield or know, I try to keep in forefront of the legislator's mind, at least in the House, the issue with the care of the children in the state of Illinois that have either been in contact or in DCFS care. If you Google Tom Weber and DCFS, you will find numerous speeches where, I'll be honest, it was very hard for me to speak about the deaths of the children. But as we know, this squeaky hinge gets the oil, right? And so, like Steve, we are determined to try to make some changes that will affect and possibly save a child's life here in the state of Illinois. There should be nothing more important than the care of these children that are under state care. So I am working on, I am on a work group with Steve for child welfare. I am also on a separate work group with Representative Athans. This is a Democrat and Republican work group where Representative Athans came over and we spoke, and we've got agreement from both sides that something needs to be done with the Department of Children and Family Services. We see cases where in one instance, 14 times where DCFS has had intervention and accusations of abuse, and to me what looks like evidence of abuse, but yet the children stay in the households. And then I had a family come to my office from halfway across the state to tell me the story about how there was never any verified abuse in their home, but their child was taken away and put up for adoption. There seems to be no rhyme or reason. There seems to be no uniformity in the way each case is handled. And I think the department is a disaster. I agree with Steve, something else has to be done. I think in local control, I have filed legislation that would give Lake County State's Attorney and other states' attorneys and law enforcement agencies the ability to have oversight if they deemed that DCFS had failed to identify abuse, that they would be able to go in and take a second look. I actually had multiple hearings on that in committee, and in the end, they came in and kind of put a stop to it. But some kind of oversight over an agency that time and time again, you can read in the paper the failures. Our Auditor General did a report this year. Out of 90, so out of the case files requested, and they were just random, 95% of those files did not contain welfare checks on the children. 95%. That's a systemic problem that has been going on for years when that is overlooked. Anyone that's ever done work with government knows that, if there's not an I dotted or a T crossed, you can't get paid if you're working for government or do anything else and get anything done. But yet these agencies do not have what's required to be in those files and yet are continuing to operate on a daily basis. 12 contempts of court, Director Mark Smith. That is unheard of. I don't know if I've ever heard of that many contempts of court for a director of the Department of Children and Family Services. There's obviously a problem.
Staffing is an issue as well.
Pardon that?
Staffing is an issue as well.
Well, and they had, I believe, an extra $300 million to hire people, and there are still multiple empty positions. So when people say, oh, it's the money, there's not enough money, that is not true.
Right.
Anyone have any questions in regards to DCFS? So as far as some of the legislative priorities, one thing that I've been trying to work with our natural resources here in McHenry and Lake County, the Chain of Lakes, Fox River area, the hundreds of millions of economic revenue that generates for our residents, for our business. That equals jobs, income. We've seen a lot of our businesses close over the last decade, since 2008. It's been a very hard business environment. But when our waterways are closed, people aren't coming here to spend money. So I've been working together with Department of Natural Resources, Fox Waterway, Army Corps, shoreline stabilization type of projects. And we monitor in our office the rainfalls. So when we see water levels start to rise, whether it be in Wisconsin or not, we will put a call in and ask for the gates to be opened to try to. The last 3 years, you have very, seen any close down, no wake or anything on the chain of lakes. And I think people are forgetting kind of, 4 or 5 years ago, it wouldn't be uncommon for a month out of the summer to have the waterways shut down because of flooding. That we haven't had that. We've been monitoring that very closely. So hopefully we can make some changes. But as we know, the Fox Waterway does not collect tax dollars. They get their revenue from their boat ticket registrations and from donations. For the most part, they sell a little bit of dirt and everything else. However, they are not part of your property tax or any other tax bill. So because there always seems to be an endless need for work on the chain of lakes, whether it be dredging, shoreline stabilization, or anything else. I did file HB 5495. It is if I believe that is the right number, wait. So it would affect the motor fuel tax. So I believe that if you go to a marina to fill up your boat, and you're going to take that boat on a chain and you're going to, affect that waterway, I believe that the taxes that the state collects from those marinas for those boats should come back into that waterway to help the management and the upkeep of those. I've had a lot of discussions. We don't think this is a big amount of money that's going to affect every village and county across the state. It's, there's not that many marinas there, so. But I believe that, these are those things, we tax cars, and ideally that's going to go to fix the roads. These boats that are filling up our marinas, it would be nice if those tax dollars went back into the upkeep of our natural. There's one as far as law enforcement. 4 years I've been trying to pass a drone bill, which is very difficult. And so it's a very simple, we're doing some modifications on it this year. But literally it's to allow law enforcement to do training, because if you read the actual act that's there now, training would not fall under the categories when law enforcement can fly, so most of them have to do the training on their own time. It would also allow for public demonstrations. One thing we've been looking at is on the chain of lakes, there are some islands. Every once in a while there are 911 calls out of those islands. We don't know whether those are someone needs ambulatory assistance, if it's fire, if what exactly is needed. I talked to the chief of police in Fox Lake. We're trying to add in there that in instances like that, they could use a drone where in 15 minutes they can maybe go out and assess the information. Meanwhile, we've got people, it takes too long for a boat to load up and get out there not knowing exactly what's needed. So that is one thing we are adding to that. And to be able to surveil private property if the owner gives permission. So that would be one thing. And then police, just that if there are any mandates for training or anything else, that they would be null and void if there was not funding for it. Because we see a lot of mandates for training and requirements for everything else. That would be HB 3389. That is something you are very well familiar with. That is all I have.
Well, thank you.
You have any questions?
It's all good. All of them.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Tom.
Thank you.
And welcome back to our own Suzanne Ness, last but not least. Thank you for joining us, Suzanne.
Well, thank you very much for having us. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. So, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning.
So I want to start. You had us here to give you some overview of what we've been doing. 22 months in office, so it feels longer in some ways and shorter than others, but it's been a good experience. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that I have done and then go into what some of my priorities are for next session, and if time, to answer questions to some of the things we've heard today. So some of the things that I did, I think it was Representative Reick that said our first job or priority is public safety. I believe that's definitely a pillar of what we do. I personally feel my first job is to listen to the people I represent and to bring resources to our district and to ensure that we are being represented in Springfield. That's what drove me to run for this role in the first place, and that's what I've tried to do. So listening to people, talking to people, making sure that I understand what the constituent needs are, and proudly drafting legislation that was driven largely by constituents. And one example that hasn't been talked about a whole lot, last summer, I had an 80-year-old woman call me. She lives in her home, on her own still, and she was deeply disturbed that the senior property tax deferral program was charging her 6% interest on her deferred property tax, which in the state of Illinois, we have a fund that allows for people to defer this when there's a need based for it, and they qualify. At the rate that it was going, she was really worried that she was going to be taxed out of her house and have to, if she ever needs to move to a place with skilled care, she wouldn't be able to afford it. So my first reaction was, I can't believe we're charging 6% to seniors on money that, we have agreed that this is something that they should be allowed to do. So we wrote a bill. She came and testified in front of the Revenue Committee, and the committee agreed with her, and it was rolled into the property tax bill that ultimately passed, of which I do not have the number in front of me, and that interest rate was cut to 3%. So that was the sort of thing where she called me. It didn't make sense to me. It was something that we could go and do something about, and I was really proud to do that. And I did some other legislation similar to those lines, including the one to dissolve the McHenry County Township statute that's now in effect. And we've met a couple of different times with a number of you on this committee. Not only did we get to an agreed moratorium on it, but given the change up in the primary election, there's a good chance, and I'm prepared to refile that bill to go for the full repeal of that bill. So that's something that I plan on doing moving forward. I also went ahead and started a number of committees that are citizen action groups around issues that I felt were important. Long-term care facilities, senior issues in the county, individuals with developmental disabilities and their families, which is an area we don't talk about a lot. And what's come out of those discussions, a number of things we've heard this morning, but something I have not heard mentioned here, is the need for more residential placement treatment centers around our state. We have situations and unique cases, and I've helped on a couple of them, where families can find places for their children in other states, but because they were not approved by ISBE, the State Board of Education, they had to fight and go through a very arduous process to ultimately wind up having their children placed there because there are no beds or places for their family members here in the state of Illinois. So not only did we get that child placed, but we also got ISBE to approve it, which means that the hundreds of thousands of dollars that this local school board would have had to pay, they didn't have to pay because the State Board of Elections ultimately approved that placement. So then the state picks up that cost. Those are the kinds of things that I believe is paramount to what I do in this role as a state representative. And it turns out, according to my Fitbit, that I logged 30 miles last week knocking on doors with constituents, and I did not hear a single person talk about House Bill 3447. So given that that's just sitting there in the committee right now, and it has not been signed into law, I plan on taking a look at it as well and some of the things I've heard here today, but I haven't heard a single person talk to me about that. People are talking about the Safety Act. They are worried about that. And something that I did right after lame duck, because I was not sworn in at the time of that legislation, I came back to the district and I pulled every chief in my district, invited them all to a meeting. Some of them came, some of them did not. I'm happy to say most of the McHenry County chiefs came, including our sheriff and Deputy Sheriff Rob Tottleman. And I've met with them almost monthly, including last February. I brought the deputy counsel to the speaker to our district to speak with them personally about what their concerns were about the Safety Act. So they were able to talk directly to one of the principal drafters of the legislation. And he heard their concerns, and he shared his contact information with them. Because I don't need to be the middle person for every single thing that comes to me. I think people should have access to state government. That's why I ran for this role. Some of the things that I personally know, and I've followed up with staff to make sure is happening, that have to be done before January, include things like fixing the language about trespassing, making sure that electronic monitoring, if that is the way that we are going to monitor people who are out of jail awaiting their trials, that they have ways to do things like go to the doctor's offices. We have heard some examples and issues where they have to relook at some of the offenses that might be releasable, but at this point, it is judicial discretion and will remain judicial discretion even after the passage of this law. And it's worth noting, which is something that I never hear anybody say, that the federal system has never had cash bail. So there already is a model in place in the United States that does not include cash bail, and it's worked pretty well. And so I believe that by looking at what's working and applying it to some of these ideas, that we can come up with a system that is going to work and serve the best interests of our entire state. There are also some other issues that relate to the dollars and the money. And something that I've been thinking about as I was listening to people talk, and this is actually an idea, you know, we have ways of doing this well. The ARPA dollars were distributed so well. The federal government put together a short application. It was based on a formula, based on population, and municipalities got their money pretty quickly. And I'm not sure why we didn't do that with some of the dollars in the criminal justice funding. But I am going to go back, and if it's not there, I want to propose that we move forward and disseminate money. Instead of requiring you to apply for grants and make that a process that's difficult and cumbersome, we say, based on this legislation, based on population, this is the money that you are eligible to receive. And then we create an easy process for people to receive it. We also added $25 million to pretrial services in last year's budget for the Supreme Court. So I know the state's attorney is here and a couple of other people. That would be a place I would direct you to look, because that was directly put into pretrial services to help with some of the upfront costs that we anticipate based on the changes in the Safety Act. So there are definitely things that will have to be continue to be refined as that process goes forward. And I'm eager to be at the table as those processes go forward. I've been pretty adamant about coming in every time there's a caucus meeting or there's a conversation about legislation that's important. I've been pretty adamant and consistent about bringing concerns back that I hear not only from this group, but from the constituents that I represent, local stakeholders, the sheriffs, the chiefs in my district, the school districts. Like, that has been ongoing, and I'll continue to do that. So I'm looking forward to what's next. I've not heard anything about our legislative agenda, especially not about lame duck. You know, we have veto session first. So as I find out and we know, I will for sure be sharing that with all of you. Going forward, I would like to see us create some uniformity across the state of Illinois when it comes to state agencies. Right now, there's no universal URLs. It was one of the things I complained about when I first got there, and so I wrote a bill to address that issue. We're not quite there yet to be able to do it, but we are working on innovation and technology throughout the state. And it is my hope that one day you will be able to see universal URLs, whether it's from an email or website, when it relates to a state agency. So that was one thing. A couple of other things, like I've heard my colleagues express, I am looking at a child welfare working group as well. I wrote a bill last year based on a constituent that runs a group home daycare, just to give you some sense of what I've heard Representative Wilcox or Representative Weber and Reick say. Right now, there are 9,000 group homes, daycares in the state of Illinois. Those are all licensed through DCFS, through an agency that already is not doing a good job handling other things like foster care placements and taking care of children and welfare checks. Why they also are tasked with licensing group daycares, I'm not quite sure about, but there were some issues around capacity. And for smaller homes in our areas where we have fewer daycare centers and families have fewer choices, it's important that we have adequate daycare homes and group homes to manage that special need. So this person came to me, wanted to increase capacity, made a great case for what she was looking for, what she wanted. We wrote the bill, we had a hearing. It didn't go so well. We're going to go back to the table to do it again. But in my mind, we can start by looking at the big picture and saying, should that remain under one umbrella? Or does it make sense to now create some carve-outs, to have that be a standalone agency that licenses daycares and group homes and removes some of the other things that DCFS is doing? So I think when we're looking at some of these bigger picture issues, those are some things that I'm glad to work with my fellow colleagues on, because I think they're vitally important, not only to the future of Illinois, but particularly to the most vulnerable, which are children.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions from the committee? Pam, please.
I'm going to ask a favor.
Yes.
When it comes to particularly sensitive issues like that, DCFS, dealing with our children, one of the problems that you have when you carve out or when you try and create is the requirement in the state of Illinois to find in-house lateral moves that are acceptable. And a lot of times, I think it makes sense, a lot of times it does not. Particularly when you're looking for individuals with very specialized skill sets, when you're trying to redo something appropriately, I would just ask you to be sensitive to maybe a carve-out of that requirement. And I don't mean in general, because I know that's a sensitive issue, but when it's very pointed about a specific skill set and what you're trying to do, I think that that's one of those areas that you might want to consider. Because part of the problem is we get people who really have no idea what they're looking for. Just
Thank you.
suggestion.
Kelly?
Thank you. Thank you. I want to say thank you for not just talking about the problems that we have in our county, but the solutions that you have been working on. I mean, you're one of the only people that I hear that actually go out and talk to so many different people and then bring them together. So the fact that you met with all the sheriffs and chiefs and brought them to the speaker is just incredible, because you're not the middleman. You're not saying anybody would do this, but you're not distorting a message. I think that's very important. And the clarity of what you have done and the communication. I just think, I really admire everything you're doing, and not just because I'm your friend, but I just think you're doing a great job, and you've jumped in and done so many different things. My question is, when you are talking to people, what is the main concern that you hear out of anything?
Well, this year that would be difficult, because it's really across the board. I think one of the biggest concerns is that people just don't know where to go or who to talk to get accurate information. I think that's the biggest concern. And, you know, I think that's incumbent on all of us. And I said this when I was on the county board, and I feel deeply that all of us have a responsibility and obligation to building that trust and building that engagement with people, because they look to us for answers. And so when you're the only person there, standing at their door, you know, like, I feel this sense of responsibility to guide them in the right direction. And that's been challenging. So to your credit as well, I love the communication that's coming out of McHenry County. I subscribe to the emails. I used to berate Pete about, you know, what's our account to? Do we have a constant contact account? How many registered emails? But I get those emails and I share them when I'm at doors, and people are getting them as well. So it's great to have a place where I can talk to and refer people to when they want to know what's happening at the county level. We get some of that through the bill. I live in Crystal Lake. I get a monthly newsletter, so I know what's happening there. So I think the more that we can make sure that we're doing that, and that we're giving people the information that they need and that's important to them, without some of the, you know, the different ways to spin that, but just saying it like it is. So something else that I really want to do, I agree with a number of the things I've heard about process. We don't make it easy to access. It's not easy to go to the ILGA website and find out about bills, and some of the things that you heard Senator Wilcox talk about that happens, I don't agree with those things either. It doesn't help us grow and build trust when we do things like gut a bill and put something else in it, and then you look up a bill number to try to understand it, and even people that have been doing it have a hard time. So those are some things that I'd also like to see change, but that's incumbent on all of us. Anybody in an elected position is responsible for that. That's what I've heard.
Tom Wilbeck.
When you were talking about the Safety Act, you mentioned trespass. Expand on what you mean by that.
Yeah, so one of the biggest complaints that I heard from the chiefs and from just constituents is that concern that if somebody trespasses on private property, that the police, what was being put out there because of the lack of clarity in language, it could be interpreted as that the police then could not arrest or remove that person from a person's property, which is not true, but in the way the language was written, it was open for interpretation. And so that was one of the things that they were working with local law enforcement to change the language. If somebody trespasses on private property and you call the police, yes, the police can remove them from your property. And they're not allowed to trespass, so that's still illegal.
Other questions? There being none, thank you very, very much for joining us. Really appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you.
I like the fact that we've been having a very good relationship with all of our representatives here in Henry County. And
Absolutely. Yeah, no, your committee's doing a good job of keeping that dialogue going, so thank you.
thank you, Suzanne. All right. Moving right along, we have a resolution authorizing the acceptance of the Sustained Traffic Enforcement Program STEP grant from the Illinois Department of Transportation for fiscal year 2023 and an emergency appropriation to the sheriff's fiscal year 2022 budget. Can I have a motion and a second?
I'll second.
Cam made the motion and John seconded.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I enjoyed sitting through our legislators' comments, so thank you for letting us do that. Before you is an annual resolution for a grant that the Sheriff's Office applies for through the Illinois Department of Transportation. This grant covers 2 years, so part of it is an emergency appropriation for the Thanksgiving campaign, which is in this fiscal year, and the rest is for the budget for next fiscal year, so that once approved, that'll be put into the budget. So this grant covers occupancy protection and impaired driving, where we get reimbursed for overtime that is spent out there doing these campaigns. We participate in a Thanksgiving, Christmas, St. Patrick's Day, Memorial Day, Independence Day, and Labor Day campaign. These tend to be times when there's celebrations going on, and we're able to be out there and hopefully prevent any incidents from impaired driving.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
Just a quick question.
Carolyn?
Thank you. So when you talk about occupant safety, that's,
Seatbelts.
okay.
It should just say that.
Well, and then I'm realizing mobilizations means that's the whole event where you're mobilizing officers to,
Correct.
right, so for the occupant. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Nowak,
Yes.
Von Bergen,
Yes.
Wilbeck,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Altough,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Thorson.
Yes. Okay. 7.2, resolution authorizing a contract with Gall GALLS LLC for a 2-year base contract period from 12/1/22 to 11/30/24 and 2 additional option years, 12/1/24 and through 11/30/26 for the Sheriff's Office uniforms and accessories.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second. Kelly seconds.
Great, thank you. So this year, we worked with the purchasing director and his team on putting out a bid for uniforms. Gall's was the only respondent this time. For that, the prices, of course, have gone up, so we're looking to lock in at least the next 4 years so that we know for budgeting purposes. The Sheriff's Office utilizes uniforms, so just about everybody except 16 of us are in uniform. So this provides us the opportunity to keep everyone not only in a uniform looking like system, but some of the positions, they do get damaged and then it's not up to the employee to replace it. So in the resolution, the $315,000, that is across all of our departments that we use that for. So initial issue, when someone's hired, they're given usually 3 shirts, short sleeves, 3 long sleeves, pants, shoes, depending on what department. There's other accessories that come with that, and unfortunately that does add up. So, and most of them are replace as needed. So for like our clerks, they don't replace as much, but in the other areas there is replacement that happens.
Yeah.
Any thought process on why we only received one bid response? I mean, is it location, is it?
No, I can't answer that. The director of purchasing would have to, but we send it out. Normally, we do get about 4 respondents. Gauss has always come in much less than the other one, so I don't know if it's the quantity that they do in the area or if some of these companies are focusing on other areas because of supply and demand. But right now, we have Gauss, and I had a new clerk in her pants. She's been with us for 4 months and she hasn't had pants yet, so it's
Wow.
taking a long time to get stuff. Yeah.
Carolyn?
So keeping in mind inflation, and because they've been the low bidder in the past, I mean, does it still seem reasonable? I mean, because you get to the question, are we getting a reasonable bid? But kind of keeping in mind that inflation has a role in this, do you feel?
We feel it's reasonable, especially on the years out. So there was a jump from this contract, the one that we're currently in, to the proposed one, but then moving forward, there's not much of a jump. Hopefully, in the next 4 years, inflation doesn't keep going up, but we do still feel that it's reasonable. But we always look at that. Our garage and our custodians, we use a different system where we use a company that comes in and every week is cleaning and replacing uniforms for them, so.
I think we have a individual that just walked in that could answer that prior question.
Oh, you must have been watching.
I've got it on, we're doing capital, but I'm listening. Yeah, one of the, Sandy can explain it much better than I
Can
can.
you just come up to the
Oh, sorry.
microphone, please?
Sandy deferred it to you.
And I'm gonna throw it right back.
All right.
No.
All right. That's what we do on a team.
That's right, I apologize, but yeah, the reason we do typically get few to one on this is because the sheriff's office has a unique online ordering system, and what I do hear from vendors is that it's borderline proprietary, but it works really well for them. Gauls has implemented it, and they have it, they own it. No one else has that, and that's what deters everybody else, because the sheriff uses it as a requirement because of how convenient this ordering system is for the entire department.
Got it.
So
That
that
does make
system is a
sense.
quartermaster system.
Thank you,
Yeah.
quartermaster system.
Yeah. I'm really surprised other places don't do it, and it works for us because when individuals return uniform, if it doesn't fit or whatnot, we keep it on site. So we have a supply, we have a big room that has uniforms, but it also allows our employees to go online and order. So if there's some of the contracts, they're given a certain amount of money for uniform allowance, so they can just go online, order, and it depletes their account that's given to them.
Good. Thank you.
Other questions? There being none, do we have a roll call, please?
Wagner,
Yes.
Althoff,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Von Bergen,
Yes.
Nowak,
Yes.
Wilbeck,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Thorson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, before us, we have a resolution authorizing the remodel of the circuit court's third floor customer service area and an emergency appropriation in the circuit clerk's operation and administration fund for fiscal year end 22 to 23 budget.
I'll make that motion to approve.
We have a motion and a second. Pam made the motion, Carolyn seconds.
Good morning. Actually, both of these resolutions I did touch on a little bit during my budget presentation. So the remodeling resolution, the remodeling we're looking to do, it's something we've been saving for probably the last 3-4 years, something we knew that we needed to do, we've been wanting to do. Particularly the glass enclosure and redoing our third floor customer service counter. It became even more apparent during COVID that it would be much better to be able to enclose that counter like our first floor customer service counter is enclosed with glass. We also didn't really have an ADA accessible counter in that office. Most of the customers we get in that third floor office are filling out petitions for orders of protection. So we have some viewing computers where they actually fill out those petitions electronically right there in the office. And this remodeling project will then it'll remove the glass barrier between the office and the hallway, make it more open and evident that this is the main customer service area for that third floor, but then put the glass instead at our counter area. So that's the first phase of the project, and then while we were having construction done, also removing our old movable shelving, that after we went to electronic files, we don't need the big movable shelving units anymore. You know, they were real expensive back in the day, and, you know, everybody had to have them because we needed them to fit all those files, but now they're pretty much useless. Yeah, exactly, dinosaurs for sure. And then the third portion, our old customer service area where when we were accepting paper, used to be filled with, you know, people, especially at the end of the day, they would come with suitcases at the end of the day of paper to file at that counter. Now is unused, so looking to wall that off and make that hallway facing conference rooms, to expand the area that Turning Point uses to meet with the people who are getting orders of protection. So that's kind of the three phases, looking to do that out of circuit clerk's operation and administration fund balance, and that we've been kind of saving for the last few years to accomplish this project.
Any questions? Tom?
On your fifth attachment there, it's got 3 different alternatives. Can you explain what those 3 alternatives are?
I think we ended up going with all 3 alternatives then that the architect suggested. I do believe because they were pricing, we wanted to price each one separately in case we couldn't afford all of the options.
Well, for example, it says the base bid is $84,100, and then if you take alternate 1, 2, and 3, add those up, it doesn't equal.
Maybe there is, and unfortunately Tom Burrows could not be with us today. One thing that we did not accept the lowest bidder, and that was because they have bid it like at around 130,000, so it was significantly lower. The references that they provided were not really references for the company itself. They were references for the project that the project manager had been involved in. So that was the reasoning behind not accepting that extremely low bid. We went with the next one higher than that.
It was just difficult to read, that's all.
Okay, I can take a look at that and see
No
if
big deal.
maybe I can come up with an answer on that.
Okay.
I think there was a couple different alternatives as far as where they would end the conference room space. And there was one alternative that ended up being very expensive. I didn't think that they printed that part, but to remove the glass, they called it the storefront at the, where the counter is on the 3rd phase there. That's in the old 1970s building. And when the architect looked at that, they said to even touch that glass storefront would be very expensive. I think it got into asbestos and how it was holding up the building, and so we completely avoided touching the glass storefront on that 3rd part, which was remodeling that unused counter space.
What's the total amount on the project?
197, I believe.
Okay.
And so that may have been one of the options, was doing something with that glass storefront that was on that 3rd section, and we steered away from that because they said it would be very expensive.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns? There being none, can we have a roll call, please?
Nowak,
Yes.
Von Bergen,
Yes.
Wilbeck,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Altough,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Thorson.
Yes. All right. 7.4, we have a resolution authorizing agreement with Rhino Group to redevelop the circuit clerk and the 22nd court websites, and emergency appropriation to the circuit clerk's court automation fund from fiscal year 2021 through 22 budget.
I'll second.
We have motion. Kelly made the motion, Pam seconds. Discussion.
So this is also another goal we talked about in our budget presentation. We have a lot of, our website has a lot of information on it. In fact, I think it's got over 100 pages of information, the Rhino Group told us. And we need to make it more user-friendly. It really does save us a lot of time where people are able to get the information off of our website rather than calling and, having to have people answer the phone to find information for them. So that's been a great time saver for us, but we need to make it more mobile friendly, because most people are accessing off of their phones nowadays, and just make it more user friendly. Rhino Group did the Sheriff's Department website a couple of years ago, I believe, at this point. So that was how we were connected with Rhino Group. And the Director of Purchasing said we were able to go with them because we're looking to kind of have a consistent look and feel. This is using court automation funds, which are approved by the Circuit Clerk and the Chief Judge. Unfortunately, the Chief Judge couldn't make it because he had to be on the bench, and Dan Wallace had to leave for another meeting, but they are in support of the redesign of our website as well. We're going to do it, the court's website and the Circuit Clerk's website kind of in conjunction and together.
What a unique idea.
Tom?
Why no bidding process on this?
That was the Director of Purchasing, we discussed that, and it was basically because they've already done the sheriff's website.
What?
Again.
Explain this to me.
When you get into software and you get into programming and you get into consistency across platforms at the county, what we're trying to do is, much like an engineering provider or that kind of service provider, the coding needs to be similar. So what Kathy and the courts and myself all talked about was not going to bid because Rhino is already under contract with the county and they've already done 2 or 3 of the other websites around the county. For consistency's sake, and because it was with the courts as well, Kathy wanted to make sure that everything was consistent, so we let the Rhino Group just continue to work on hers.
We were looking kind of for the similar look and feel that they had done with the Sheriff's Department. Unfortunately, our stuff is not quite as cool as the Sheriff's Department stuff, so it might not be quite the same.
Mom, it sounds like you went through the vetting process 2 years ago, so how many people did you get in that bid? I mean, I know it's 2 years now, but.
Forgive me, I'd have to go back and look
Yeah,
at the
no, that's
file,
okay,
but yeah.
you went through that process 2
Yes.
years ago.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Any other questions? We have a roll call, please.
Wagner,
Yes.
Campbell,
Yes.
Altough,
Yes.
Wilcox,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Nowak,
Yes.
Von Bergen,
Yes.
Thorson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't believe we have any old business to discuss, actually with reports, we have a legislative update, but I believe that,
Did I do 2 minutes?
yes, absolutely, I'm sorry, Peter.
That's okay. Somewhat timely, though. We've had a lot of discussion about safety today, and of course we should be. Last week, Shaylin and I and a representative from the State's Attorney's Office, we sat in on the Chiefs of Police Association luncheon and kind of invited all those chiefs to think about all the questions that they don't have yet answered on implementation of safety. And we're going to be gathering again on October 18th in Durango, and hopefully have some more representatives from our criminal justice group to kind of talk through a little bit more about what those unanswered questions are. Because I think it's difficult at this point to talk about abandoning safety, but it is easy to talk about modifying, in particularly the Pretrial Fairness Act and how we're responding to that, and getting some of those interpretive questions answered, as we prepare to move to January 1st. So, looking forward to the questions that our chiefs have, and hopefully, pulling together some more ideas there. The Illinois State Association of Counties is also working simultaneously to gather questions or problems and potential solutions from the criminal justice systems across the state. Our team members, the Circuit Clerk, the State's Attorney's Office, Public Defender's Office, have all offered some suggestions to go into this document that will be moving forward as we get into October. So, if this body wants to take a position, maybe at your next meeting, we will have some kind of seeded ideas there for you to think about as we get to there next week or next month. So, looking forward to that. Alicia just passed out, if I could change gears here now, to the VAC bill, and I emailed this out to you all yesterday. Last week, Chairman, we were with ISACO? Yeah, last Friday, we were at a CMAP chairman's meeting, and Joe McCoy, where ISACO executive director, was there, kind of distributed this potential letter on responding to the VAC legislation. I think Mike is interested if you guys have an opinion on this. Again, we're not on a fire alarm in terms of getting a response because veto session isn't going to be until we meet again. But if this kind of communication is something you'd like to put together, let me know. There's 5 bullets in there that I think are kind of varying degrees of importance. Probably to me, the final bullet there about just complete yielding of taxation authority to a non-elected group is maybe the strongest point. But we can talk about that more next month as we come together if that's an issue that you want to take up. Am I getting anything on that, Mike?
No, I mean, my thought is that we let our VAC take a look at this yet and see if they have any concerns about it. I definitely want to run that past them first and see if
Okay. Good suggestion.
I just have kind of a double-pronged comment. I understand, that there's a committee meeting before veto session, et cetera. However, as we move forward, and I think we've made the statement that McHenry County wants to be more engaged in whatever that legislative process is at the state level, perhaps federal level, et cetera. I don't think we can make just a perception that we're all going to come together and you're going to present a document to us, we're going to look at it, and we're going to come to an agreement at one meeting. So I'm just very sensitive to confirm again that we really do want to come up with a process to be engaged at different levels of government and have an opinion. But I'm sensitive to the fact that, as pointed out, we have a tendency now, and I don't want to make it political, but it's going to be part of our discussions, that maybe we're not all on the same page, and we should allow for a little bit of preliminary time to think about and disseminate the information. Or, second point, or everybody on this committee better be prepared when they come to committee to have that discussion and make a decision. Because timing is going to be real important, and I don't think that we can kind of just sit back and we'll do it next time. So just two pathways, not right, not wrong. Just I'm sensitive to timing issues and kind of deferring all the time or not being prepared. So just kind of.
It's very fair. If you got questions on this, let me know.
This is going to be part of your report too. This is going to be part of your report too at the cow, right?
It sure could.
Yeah.
Should be.
Last thing, Chairman Bueller and I met yesterday with, and Scott Hartman met with Mayor Marengo and his staff, kind of talking about 2390 and some of the exciting things that are happening last night. Hopefully the city of Marengo approved an agreement now with DCEO, to a $27 million water sewer expansion to bring utilities down to the interchange. That's awesome.
Yes.
It's going to take a couple of years. But what we also need, and this is how it's related to our legislators, we also are going to need ComEd and NICOR to feel the same sense of urgency to get down there. And that may take our legislators some assistance there. And so as we're developing our program for next year, I'm thinking that there may be an opportunity for some statements along those lines in our legislative program in 23.
Right, well, and then we specifically discussed contacting ComEd and NICOR, letting them know that we have this upcoming and getting on their radar so that they know what we need.
We don't want to finish the water sewer and then call NICOR.
Kelly, did you have?
Just, can you remind me, is there currently high-speed fiber down there, or is that part of the plan?
There is fiber up and down 90.
Okay.
So it is there.
So we don't
it's
have
not
to
It's not too difficult to get there.
Other questions? All right.
Thanks.
Okay, Alicia, you don't have anything else, do you?
No, the legislators more than covered.
Yeah, thank you. I do, we do have the need for an executive session for pending litigation.
Make a motion to go into executive session for pending litigation.
We have a motion and a second.
We'll take a break first.
Yeah, you know what, let's take a break. That's a great idea, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks for using WebEx. Visit our website at www.webex.com.
How long is the break? 10 minutes? 5 minutes?
Yeah, 10-minute break.
Yeah.
Opposed? All right, can I have a motion to go back into regular session, please?
So moved.
John and Kelly seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now, can I have a motion, the best motion of all, to adjourn? Tom and Bob. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.